I've really always kind of taken the approach of I can't ask people to do things I won't do myself. If I want my clients to get lean, I've got to show them I can get very lean. If they know I'll push to that level, I have the right to ask them to go to that level as well. I'm not the type of guy that's going to yell at you and get in your face and, give you the rah rah pep talk, but I will be the one that will, I'm going to challenge you and question you.
Hey, everybody. I am Joe Klemczewski. Welcome to the Origins podcast, talking about the nutrition coaching industry and trying to go back and chronicle some of the most important stories that led us to this point in our entire occupation. And of course, you already recognize I have Cliff Wilson with me, and we have a very interesting backstory because as Cliff mentioned to me, without my even knowledge at the time, we had met the very first time, I think the only time, when you, Cliff, had competed in a show I was promoting. Was that in 2008?
That was my very first show.
So some interesting things to pick through. And when I reached out to you and apologized that, gosh, we have never even been in the same room, all of the things we've done for almost 2 decades, we've just never crossed paths. You said, well, we actually did meet. And that was a weird thing.
There's absolutely no reason you should have remembered me from that show. My physique was not very notable.
Well, I could say also, promoting shows, your brain is in a million different places on that day. But 2008. So this is why I wanted you in my top 10 for this podcast series. Your longevity is remarkable. You were one of the first people, which is what I want to talk about initially, who really took the mantle and carried personal nutrition coaching, contest prep coaching into its current iteration. And as I've told most people I've talked with in the first few episodes, I certainly did not see any of this coming. Matter of fact, as I describe my foray into coaching, it was, of course, just accidental because there was no such thing. And I just started helping some clients, helping some friends. I knew that legally we were up against a wall, and that's why I created a licensing company where I could hire a medical director and a dietetics director. And because of those obstacles, Cliff, I just never thought there was even a path forward. It's like I'm barely kind of skirting under the radar here. I think I'm covering my bases, but this is always just going to be a little side project. As a matter of fact, about 10 years into that process, I just kind of left. I decided, well, this isn't where I'm necessarily going to head into, for the length of my career. And then all of a sudden, here comes Lane and Eric Helms and you and Paul Ravella, and the whole surge into creating such academic rigor, all of the research happening, especially now in what we do. It kind of surprised me. It took me by storm. And you were one of those first people, and this is where I think there's a little tension unintentionally between us, in that as clients and people would talk to me about other things happening, your name kept popping up. Well, Cliff says this and Cliff does this. And I think you said you got word back that I was, not happy with you, or I wasn't supportive of what you were doing. So I'd love to hear that side of the story.
Yeah. I'll say that. So I think I was one of the first people doing this without a degree. And I did have that conversation and much like yourself, I fell into this sport. I fell into coaching accidentally as well. The internet was starting to get really popular. And I know Lane really made a big mark through the forums. This is going to sound really ignorant now, but back then, I never really ventured into the forums. I didn't know. I knew that there were social aspects of the internet. And I guess for myself, I was not terribly interested in the social aspect. I was more, nuts and bolts of bodybuilding. And so I never went into the bodybuilding.com forums. So everybody, I was talking with Alberto Nunez even like last year or whatever. And he was like, I never even really saw you on the forums. I'm like, I didn't really know what was going on in there. All I knew, the only people that I knew that were coaching at the time were like you and Lane and the guy that was coaching Ronnie Coleman for a while, Chad Nichols. Yeah. I was very interested in like what Chad Nichols was doing because he was like just coaching bodybuilders. And that was very intriguing to me. But I had questions about whether or not, well, let me put it this way, actually. So I did your first show. And around that time, I walked into the gym one day, and I was with one of my friends. He's like 7 foot tall. We played basketball together in high school and college. And I saw a kid who was a couple years younger than me. And just, you can spot great genetics when you see them, and I just said, man, if I had that guy's genetics, what I could do with it. I could tell by watching him, he didn't really know what he was doing. And my buddy goes, well, let's find out. And he goes, you should do a bodybuilding show. My friend will help you. And I was like, yeah. And we just kind of became training partners. I didn't really, I wasn't like charging him or anything like that. And then a couple months went by, and he was making good progress, and we were just training together every day. And he saw another guy in the gym that had unreal genetics too. And he's like, hey, you should do the show with me. And then what do you know? I'm helping two people. Like I said, just wasn't really coaching. And anyway, I put them in the NANBF Mr. Illinois contest in 2009. So about a year after I did my first show. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't doing anything, no email. I would meet them at the gym, and I would scribble on a piece of paper, here, follow these macros for a day, for the week or whatever. And we'll check in and see how you look next week. And so about a year later, we put them on stage, and one guy won the overall, and the other one took second in the novice division. And back when novice divisions were like really competitive, there was like 8 guys in that class. And after that, and Lane happened to be at that show. And after the show, Lane came up to me, and he's like, wow, he's like, I haven't seen hardly anybody get someone that lean before. And he's like, you could make a career out of this. And it hadn't really occurred to me to make a career out of it, to be honest with you. Like you said, I was just scribbling on pieces of paper at the gym. And I had the question of, was I qualified to be doing it? And I discussed it with my dad. So my dad is a PhD in plant pathology. And I had a question, I asked him, like, should I be doing this? And he had an interesting take on it. He said that one time he went to a conference on plant pathology, and, everybody would, there were a lot of speakers at the event. And he said that one guy came up, and he didn't have a degree. I think he had a bachelor's in some sort of business management or something, nothing to do with plant pathology, but he had been on the business side of things so much that he had started to get involved for so long. He had started to get involved on the pathology side. And he said that he gave a presentation that really blew everybody away. It was what he had seen working in the field, his thoughts about maybe why it was working, and kind of put it out to the rest of the scientists in the office, in the audience, to test it. I have these ideas, I've done this, and I've seen this work. And he said that everybody was kind of blown away. And he said a lot of the things that he proposed ended up getting tested by the people in that audience, and turned out to be true, some not as true, but then they found other reasons why these things were working in the field. And my dad kind of put it to me that maybe I could be that guy, and so I was like, I could be that guy, because up to that point, before I did my first show, I used to do just a lot of wacky stuff on myself just to see what would happen. I mean, I have in these closets right over here, I have notebooks from 2006 and stuff where I would just be like, what happens if I eat 400 grams of protein and try to keep carbs and fat as low as possible? And I'd try that for a month. I just wanted to see how I felt, how I trained, how I looked. And then I tried the opposite, right? Lower protein, lower carbs, or lower fat, high carbs. And I would just try things. And I felt like when I got into coaching, I had done so many, like, so much guinea pigging on myself. I felt like I had at least a decent handle of the practical applications of certain things. And so I kind of went about it that way. And yeah, when I first got into it, I know a lot of people weren't too happy that I was doing this without a degree. Lane was really welcoming to me, but I think at the time he was probably the only one.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, and that's where Lane and I had a couple early disagreements. And from my perspective, because I was always a little bit leery and maybe just too accepting of the legal dogma. Every single state, I'd looked up the statutes and I knew where the harshest ones were, like Ohio and Florida. And if you're not an RD or an MD, you just can't do this. And now, 20 some years later, a lot of state legislators, which is very strange to me, I still don't know like who even proposed this. In the Indiana State House, in the last 20 years, they have changed it. So now you're restricted to not doing medical nutrition therapy, but very much like personal training, it's logical now looking back that as long as you have some credibility, you're always going to be on the line, on the hook for any sheer negligence. Anybody can sue anybody. And if you're presenting your case in front of a judge or a jury and you've just done something horrible, I don't care if you're an RD, MD or not, like you're still liable. But the laws were so strict. I just thought, okay, here's the playing field we have to be in. And even with a doctorate in nutrition, I'm not qualified legally to even be doing what I'm doing. So when other people started coming up, I thought, okay, wait a second, this is going to be like Napster 2.0. It's like like music piracy. This is going to the whole house of cards is going to come tumbling down. So I was not accepting of anybody. I was always looking over my own shoulder, Cliff. And then Lane, when he came, onto the scene, as you said, he was like, "Yeah, anybody can be a coach. Everybody should do this. It's great. Let's all do this together. Kumbaya." And I'm like, "Whoa! Like, hang on. Like, there are these laws, and we should probably respect those." And now I see that in sheer mass, my blind spot was just simply, and it's what I'm trying to correct now, just making sure that we enforce, create the standards of practice, the scope of practice that makes us self-reliantly accepted. So, and I think this has been tested. There have been some legal cases, but imagine a judge now where a nutrition coach is sued and the person said, yeah, my coach wanted me to eat 150 grams of carbs, this much protein within the RDA, variance and this and this. And the judge would be like, well, what's wrong with that? Like, did he tell you to do anything stupid? Like, tell you to jump off a cliff, eat zero carbs, fast for 2 months? And of course, if you can defend yourself, any judge would say, well, that's normal. That's, the judge probably has a personal trainer who has done the same with him or her. So it's a whole different world than 2008 and before. And so personally, any animosity that you might have felt from me was never directed at you. That was just kind of my shield against what I saw happening in the industry that I thought could be a hindrance to everybody.
Well, in retrospect, it actually turned out to be a good thing. So, I know that there were some I know that there were some comments that I think had been posted in your team's Facebook page, about something about me, and it had kind of gotten passed around my clients at the time, and it actually turned out to be very helpful because we kind of me and my smaller group at the time, there was probably only like 12 clients that I had, really used it as a the industry does not want us here and we're gonna push back against that. And I did use it as like a you know and this is aside from the nutrition argument, but there's definitely a strong psychological component to the sport of bodybuilding, because it does become like how disciplined can you be. And so I believe that I think that especially for I had mostly competitors at the time, first time competitors. I think that for other them thinking that other people wanted to see them fail, it kind of fired them up and got the best out of them in that first going. And I 7 of the first 8 shows that I had a client in, I had an overall winner. And so it was like one after another, and it was and it really became like a good source of motivation for a lot of my clients in the early going, and they did rally around me. And you're right though, in those early days, I mean, there was also a lot of negligent like activities going on with coaches that weren't educated, because people were just throwing out crazy stuff. And with extremely high cardio, extremely low calorie plans. One thing I was always careful of, we all do our best, right? But it's not to say I didn't ever make mistakes along the way, but I always try to be careful of looking for my blind spots. What do I know? What don't I know? And I remember I told myself early on to get comfortable saying I don't know. So there were a few times I would do an interview, or I was on a couple of speaking panels, and I would just say, if they would ask me a question, I would just say, I'm not really sure in that. You might want to ask that question to so and so. They're a little more well educated in that area. And so I think that over the time, also, it's like if you don't know, you say you don't know, then you're kind of just freed up to go learn about it. and then over the course of time, after a good 12 years now here, it's like I find that I've said I don't know along the way, and now I don't have to say I don't know as much because I'm freed up to just go learn about it.
Well, and now again, another thing that's different from 14 years ago is with social media and just an almost singularity of knowledge and information. It is different, and knowledge can be had much quicker and more thoroughly in different ways. A friend of mine is the dean of medicine at Purdue University, and he said he sees in the very near future a point where you don't even have to go to medical school. If you can learn on your own, do what you need to do, and then just go pass your boards, you're in. You're a physician. You'll get licensed.
Well, that was the early stages. So I went to school for a year. I went to college for a year. I went for basketball purposes, if I'm being honest with myself. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I chose business as a major because it was like a placeholder. I was 19 years old and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was on a partial scholarship, so I still had to pay some. And I had some family issues at the moment, and so things at home were really tough. I didn't have money for school. And also, I always got, great grades in high school and in the year I was in college. But I didn't usually listen to what the teacher was saying. I'm like, the book is right here. I'll just read it, and I'm the type of person where I learn better by reading than listening anyway. And finally, after about a year, I was like, I'm paying a lot of money. I can just, purchase these books on my own. That's how I was learning anyway. I was just reading. And the internet was becoming much more mainstream in around 2004, sometime around there. And, I worked a lot of odd jobs after college until I was figuring out what I wanted to do. But I was so interested in bodybuilding. I would go on and I would try to gain access to whatever studies I could gain access to. I would, purchase studies. I would read I was so poor, but so I would read you could go on Google book search and you could read quite a few textbooks through Google book search. And I was just, and I wasn't even trying to make it a career, but I was just learning, everything that I could through my own. And I did kind of take the approach of, I was like, man, I'm paying thousands and thousands of dollars for these 2 semesters of school. And I was like, this information's free or cheap. And I was like, I can learn it on my own. I remember I got into an argument with one of my professors the first year of school. And he was like, who's here for the piece of paper? Who's here for the piece of paper that say you can get a job, and who's here to learn and better yourself? And I raised my hand. Honestly, I was like, I'm here for the piece of paper. He's like, you don't want to learn and better yourself? I'm like, I feel comfortable doing that on my own. I was like, I'm very interested in self-development. I don't need someone to push me along. I was like, I can buy these books. I can read it on my own. I can chat with other people whose opinions I respect. And he didn't like that answer, but I've always been a big proponent of self-directed education, but I don't think it's for everyone. I think that you got to have it. There's different fits for everybody. One thing I always say about like a self-directed education is that I don't think you'll ever get as much isolated bits of information as someone who goes to school. So I think it's 2 different learning styles, but the advantage it gave me is like every time I got one bit of information, I had to, in school, they'll say, here's this information and here's how it connects to this information, if that makes sense. They kind of lay out the path for you. The disadvantage is like when I would get a piece of information, I'm like, okay, how does this connect to everything else? So that's the disadvantage, is you don't know what it connects to. The advantage is that I would get one bit of information and I had to look at it from every single angle then to find out what it connects to. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd probably um, do a fair amount of both. You
Well,
know?
I agree that anybody with the work ethic can outperform and out succeed somebody with a formal education. And we have a bunch of parallels that I'm picking up between us as well. And one is that I didn't have money for college either. And so I went into the military. And I'd love to say I went in the military to serve my country, rah rah, but I went in during peacetime for the GI Bill.
Yeah.
And after I got out, the first Gulf War happened, and I was on inactive reserves. I was definitely packed and ready to go. Didn't have to, but I was definitely, there because I didn't have any other resources to move forward, in my 17-year-old opinion. But what I found is once I got into those academic settings, it was just to build a career, because growing up in poverty and seeing just zero opportunity, and yet I had friends who were going off to college and so forth, and I could see where their careers were going to go. That's what I did. And so I was off to the IU med school for physical therapy school, became a physical therapist. But at the same time, I had my bodybuilding hobby going. And once I graduated, was seeing patients in an orthopedic setting. That bug was there. I was learning. I loved it. And every professor, especially when I got into graduate school, I could see these people with 20, 30, 40 years of immense knowledge and expertise, and each one was funneling that into me. And like yourself, Cliff, I knew I could read these books on my own, but would I be forced to write these papers, do this research, and have all of this extra stuff added on to me? So probably due to my growing up under resourced and without a lot of hope, once that bug bit me, I was like, man, this is just too fun. And so I've continued on with just tons of postgraduate work, sometimes literally just for fun, because that's almost like why people hire us to coach them. Like, I look at those degree programs and those professors as coaches. They're going to get more out of me, and they're going to push me harder than I would push myself. And so I like that. But for the sense of our occupation, coaching, that's why I completely went the other direction and tried to correct that miss in my own career judgment, which is, okay, this is happening. This is now an occupation. People are doing this. People are getting all kinds of degrees, and they're even becoming tenured professors, all looking at exercise science and nutrition for physique sport. And so I can no longer just dig my heels in and fight it, or think that it's not going to happen. It's here. So that's when I started creating certification programs, started mentoring people on the business side. We started our licensing program, kind of shift toward those other modalities of certification, because I just knew people like yourself were going to carry that mantle forward. And let's go back just a step, and because I think this is always interesting to people, especially so many people are going to see you as a forever father figure of this industry. Like you're like the original founding fathers of our country. You will always be named in that first generation of coaches who brought this into fruition. So you were interested in basketball, you were in the gym. When did you first decide, man, just the sheer pursuit of strength and physique and bodybuilding, really captured you? How did that transition happen? And then I'll probably follow up and talk about a little bit more, moving into your career.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny in retrospect. I think sometimes you get glimpses of like things you'll be interested in. I was so obsessed with basketball in my youth, but I remember one time my stepdad was watching Pumping Iron, and it caught my attention. I was probably like 9, 10 years old, but I was like, "What's this about?" And I watched it, and it did make an impact on me. But then I went right along with my basketball. I went to Valparaiso University, and I remember we went for conditioning, and I was skinny fat. I'm 6'1", and they were taking all of the so I'm a freshman, and they were taking all of our heights, and they did the caliper body fat test, height, weight, caliper body fat before we started conditioning. And I mean, so I played basketball, but I'm not like this terribly gifted athlete. I was skilled. I'm not the highest jumper, the fastest runner. But these other people were a Division I athletes, and so they're reading off the heights, weights, and body fat, and we're, so and so 6'6", 6'6", 215 pounds, 8% body fat. And, they're reading them all off. And then they get to me, W, I'm last, Wilson. And they're like, Cliff Wilson, 6'1", 156, 14% body fat. So I was total skinny fat. And one of the seniors sitting next to me looks at me, he goes, damn. He goes, you got to fix that. And I was like, all right. So they got me in the weight room. And I just remember it was fun. And it was a big, and I don't need to go too big into it, but it was a real transitionary period. I had a really wild high school years. Like I said, my home life was pretty chaotic in those years. And I loved basketball, but I kind of started to realize basketball was something that I did love, but it started to be used a little bit as an escape from home issues. And so then, I go off to college and I'm playing basketball and I'm starting to realize like I'm having more fun in the gym than I am playing basketball. It was something that was just pure fun. and it was I don't know, it was good to just have something that was pure fun and wasn't being used as an escape at that point. And so I remember I was really looking forward. Everybody else was dreading conditioning, and I was like, let's do this. Let's go bench press, let's go squat, let's do this. And I just remember having a great time in the gym when I went off to school.
That's awesome. So again, that's a common thread with almost everybody. As I've talked to Lane and Paul and Eric Helms, I mean, we all seem to have that moment. Like for me, a little bit earlier because of my age, but as Lou Ferrigno in The Incredible Hulk on TV,
yeah,
and Conan the Barbarian, Arnold, and then you get into like Rocky II and Rocky III, and all of a sudden I'm going from a 5 or 6 year old kid enthralled by these caricatures of muscle and just superhero type physiques, and my dad buys a weight set, so all of a sudden there's these plastic covered cement weights, a little Joe Weider bench in the living room. And so I'm messing around with that. And then, I'm in the 7th grade and we have in our gym class, a little segment on weightlifting. And I think for anybody, like when you just feel that effect on your body, the exertion, the sweating, the soreness, I think even after a workout, like you can tell like, wow, I just feel different, whether you really do or not, like something is there. And so we all kind of have that as a background. I think that we just saw that there was a path we could take for self-improvement. That of course goes into, especially at those ages, sexuality and just strength and competition among peers, but also that link to sport. For me, it was baseball. When I got to the pony leagues, I had been a dominant catcher in the minor and major leagues. And then all of a sudden, the baseball field is a full-size field. And all of a sudden I could barely get the ball to second base from behind the plate. So I had this coach at 13 years old, you got to lift weights, this 80-year-old guy. So I'm just furiously back home lifting weights. Then start high school, and we have it was called co-ed bodybuilding and fitness, where your gym class, an elective, you just went into the gym 3 days a week to train and 2 alternate days to run. And so it was part of me since I was 11 or 12 years old. And like you mentioned, any good science-minded person loves just the experimental process. So I too have a file cabinet full of all of my notebooks and notes from my entire career, body comp stuff. I've done, long-term stints of pure keto, vegetarianism, just everything you could do with body comp analysis, DEXA scans and so forth to try and prove this. I did a master's thesis on protein utilization and, my first dissertation on something similar. And so, the fact that you were that inquisitive and you were doing it for fun, I think is the perfect setup for somebody who just has the passion to take it as far as you did. And your company tagline is intensity is everything. And that is at the heart of my core as well. And both in some of the things that we see in nutrition research and training, it seems like our academic world is kind of pushing away from that. When I hear intensity is everything, I think of the Mike Mentzer, the Dorian Yates type of training. As Lane told you with the first couple of clients you put on stage, I've never seen anybody get that lean. Like, you're willing to push farther and do more than anybody else to get that prize as a person and as a coach. And that, again, I mean, that's a shared value I have, because I've certainly lived that. And that's where my success came from in my career. But tell me where that took you as a mentality into what you wanted to accomplish once your career was in motion.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because sometimes when I say intensity is everything, people on the outside of my clientele, they always think it's like a training approach, right? It's like, I kind of just apply it to everything.
Right.
When you're going for something, you're kind of all in on it. It was never meant to be a training aspect. And I kind of took it from, I had great grade school and high school basketball coaches. I mean, the way my fifth through eighth grade basketball coaches coached us, you probably can't coach 11, 12, 13 year olds that way anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, they were so hard on us, but it was so good for me. I mean, it was so good, and it was intense, and it was, I don't care if it's sixth grade basketball. We're here to, give it everything we got, And so that was kind of the approach. It was definitely that mentality that was borrowed and brought into the team aspect of my clients. I wanted to instill, one thing I always say is, like, my clients have done a lot of winning, but I always try to de-emphasize the winning. It's our process. I would say winning isn't what we do. It's a side effect. It's a nice side effect of what we do. And you're right. I do enjoy, even though I didn't go to school for science, I'm a very science-minded person. And one thing I've always enjoyed about coaching in general is, I mean, every week it's like a scientific process, right? I get a person, they check in, and I have to form a hypothesis about what will create the outcome at the end of the week that I am trying to achieve. So I create my hypothesis, and then they go test, they go carry it out, and then we view the results at the end of the week. And then I roll that result into my next hypothesis into the next following week. And it's just this repeated, and then even on a larger scale, it plays out, right? I form hypothesis about what the entire prep should look like and what their ideal look will be. And then, we carry it out, and then the judges scores are the result of that. And then we roll that into our next one for the next prep. And it's just this, like, repeating cycle that I really enjoy. Plus, as an athlete, you just love the physical process of it as well. The effort, the physical, I mean, it's such a physical and mental endeavor that kind of ties together so nicely. And so, I carried that into my coaching. I was really fortunate because probably the first good dozen or so of my clients that competed were first-time competitors. And, it was so new. I remember they were mostly local, but then I started to get more people that were online. And I had to convince people I could do this online. And actually, at least for myself, I found I was better at doing it online than in person. I'm much more of an analytical person. And sometimes I don't always, or especially that time, I didn't always understand the way other people think. I know that my mentality sometimes tends to be my thought processes tend to be a little bit different than other people's. So it was really helpful for me to have a buffer of email, or I could also put photos side by side. Sometimes even just 15 seconds to think about what I need to say to this person to get them on board with the plan, and so it was extremely helpful. I did even better. My clients that were online did even better than my clients that were in person.
I totally agree. Matter of fact, so there's that time frame before you and I had ever met until I kind of took a little sabbatical from the industry. And in that 10 or so year run, it was almost kind of a Babe Ruth era where I was the only guy doing this, and I was doing things unconventionally enough in finding success that before anybody else really stepped in, I had helped clients win over 400 pro cards and blah, blah, blah. And now, looking back, that particular era was me, as you said, hypothesizing, making changes, and creating what I thought was, quote, the right approach. And then the next 10 years of my career has been realizing, well, there are actually plenty of different tools, and you can use any kind of process for somebody who needs that genetically, or just whatever margin of error you have for flexibility and what they prefer. And then of course the coaching process is mainly that entire scientific method you described in motion perpetually. You're constantly observing and assessing, and then fine tuning and observing and assessing. And it's a nonstop scientific method type experiment. And that's, again, one of those threads that we share in when I was 19 or 20, getting ready for my first bodybuilding contest, and then you compete, you instantly can observe and assess how it went. And like everybody else, you wake up on contest day and it's the worst you've looked. And I had to figure out why. And then I very early on, I got snagged into this organization to start promoting shows. And so now I'm promoting shows and I'm seeing 50 competitors on a weekend kind of going through the same thing. And I'm talking to them. And in my early 20s, now I'm into undergrad stuff and learning physiology. And I'm thinking, well, why is it the same story? Why is everybody disappointed on contest day? Like, what's going on? And so, of course, all the needles pointed to the fact that we're just using old school conventional peaking approach. I mean, the same thing. It was the way everything was done. So that's when I started keeping water in, not dehydrating people, not manipulating sodium quite as harshly, not doing the carbohydrate deplete and load. And I got pegged early in my career for inventing the front load, because I would take a week out, 7, 6, 5 days before the contest. And I would use that instead of a depletion phase to just start saying, well, let's kind of find that glycogen threshold. Then we'll do kind of a mild depletion and then push the load up as high as we can. So it wasn't really a front load. It was kind of an undulating load. What was the beginning of what I do now mostly, which is a progressive linear load. But as I was figuring all that out, I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients at a time in a year that I could do these things with. And even though there was a lot of success, I mean, there was also just a lot of experimentation. I mean, you're trying these things out with multiple subjects, including yourself. And I feel like my interpretation of your early career was very similar. You jumped in and you thought, hang on a second, I can do better, hold my beer. I'm going to do something differently and show everybody how good you can be. And this is a question because I believe you also have really bifurcated out, and you don't necessarily use a single approach. I'm sure you don't. So explain how, just the process and what helped you conceptualize the need for these different things, and what you were seeing in the industry that you didn't like, that you thought you could improve on.
Yeah. I guess it kind of also goes back to I had gone such a self-directed path that I think I was kind of very open to all options, if that makes sense. And so and what else was very helpful too is that I was reading as much research and and textbooks that I could get my hands on. And my first two clients, those guys I helped, like clients, they're the first two guys I helped. They were both Black. And one thing that was very interesting to me is that I had been experimenting on myself for years at this point. And a lot of research is done on college white guys, and what was working for me and what I had read to kind of be effective in research just was not working quite as well for them. And they were, it was so good. They were willing to work with me. After about 3 months of working with them, I was like, man, we're not progressing like I expected. Can we kind of hit the reset button? We can just try some different things. And man, I'm so lucky. Their names are Kenny and AJ, and I'm so lucky that they were like patient. They were like, let's do it. We I switched some things up, and I would just try some things with them, and it worked so well. Namely, lower carb, higher fat approaches, which over the years I've tended to find works quite well for. It seems to work a lot better for Black competitors than white competitors. Like you said, it just genetically, I think people just have different needs based on their ancestry. So then so I started the first year or so that I was really getting people on stage beyond those two. I was using more front loading ish type stuff. Um, it's what I knew a lot of other people were doing, and I was having good luck. I would say like my measure for success of a peak week is a peak week a success? Do you look better at the end of the week than the beginning? If you do, then it's a success, and then there's a spectrum of success, right? There's degrees of it, and so but one thing I was noticing is like people would look better sometimes on the more aggressive feed. Maybe even at the beginning of the week, they would look a little bit better. And so I didn't know exactly what was going on. It was almost as if, and I still don't know this, but I'm just kind of throwing this out here. It was almost as if when you come from this like thoroughly depleted state, pushing fluid into the muscle, it's like most things in the body, there's like this pendulum effect, right? You deplete carbs and the body creates more room in the muscle for carbs. It's almost like you swing it one way and you can't swing it back that way again. And I just noticed like the more aggressively people were fed up, the better they looked. And so I kind of tinker around with, well, what if I deplete them and then load them for 4 days and then 3 days and then 2 days? And then finally I was like, why don't I just shove it into one day and see what I could do? And I had another client at the time who was always lean. He just genetically was that. And I was like, can I just like test this thing out on you, not on a show capacity? And he's like, sure, let's do it. So I tested like doing his entire carb load in one day. And I kind of started with like, I was running down the math, like how many carbohydrates might he just utilize during that day? And I just kind of, how he might utilize this many carbs. How much carbs does he need to fill out from a completely depleted state? All right, this many carbs. And then, take into account that he's probably going to use even more because his body temperature is going to rise like crazy as he's feeding so much. So I just ended up with like this good, huge chunk of number, and it worked really well. And I utilized it more in the beginning, and it was different. But I used it for the first year or two, and I was proud of that. I was proud of I did something new. I was proud of that. But then as it went on, I'm realizing I'd spent a lot of time trying to hone this craft of peaking, and so I tried to actually stop talking about it as much, and that rapid backload peaking approach, because it wasn't the only peaking method I was using. I would use front load, especially for like a bikini competitor or somebody that some people when you load them, some people you load them and they initially look hard and grainy, and some people when you load them, it's almost like there's a transient period where their glucose doesn't assimilate into glycogen right away, so they look soft and then they look hard. So for those people, maybe I'd kind of like load them midweek and then back off just a little bit. So I tried to like backpedal in terms of like letting everyone know, hey, while this is cool, it's not the only thing that I'm doing. And still to this day, people kind of don't want to hear it when I say that.
Absolutely. I'm like, I mean, it is the famous Cliff Wilson rapid backload. I mean, that was your contribution. And again, like you said, it's because of the novelty. It's like, whoa, this is new. This is cool.
Yeah. And I was proud that I did something different, but then like I said, I was trying to like, and even to this day, sometimes like I'll get like an interview for like a interview request for a podcast, and they'll be like, we want to talk all about the rapid backload. And I'm like, I use like several other styles. Like, I would say I still use it a lot, but I think as a coach, the more tools in your tool bag, the better, and and it just doesn't sound as exciting to say, hey guys, let's try this like holistic view of coaching and not this one trick pony thing.
It's hard to sell. Yeah, that's been the bane of my existence, is like flexible dieting, macronutrient tracking. How do you make that sound sexy and fun? Yeah, it's actually math and common sense. You're not going to sell too many books doing that.
Yeah, but exactly. And it does get hard. It's hard to strike that balance, right? As a coach, because ultimately this is still a business we're trying to run. And so it's like, how do I explain things in a practical, useful, and, for lack of a better term, optimized way, to make people the best coaches they can, but also make it attractive to people? Because I mean, the things most people find attractive is usually novel and exciting and black and white, mm-hmm. And it gets hard to balance that for sure.
Well, I think one of the things, and this is what I want to talk about for a second, you have created a mystique, a lore, and not only the moniker intensity is everything, but when people look at your own personal contest photos as an ectomorph who could get lean, who was willing to do whatever it took to gain the muscle and the strength and earn that conditioning. I mean, you've got a badass, hard edged vibe to you as a competitor, you as a coach, and you as a business owner. And so, there are a lot of people who are proud of that. And in my era, that I enjoy that same thing. I know what you're feeling and what you've created, and how rightly proud you should be. And I think that's a big part of that buy-in. As you said, intensity is everything isn't just about training. It's about your approach. It's about your commitment. It's about being all in. And that psychological aspect of coaching, I every single year I pick a word that I want to center change, my own personal change around. And in the last 3 years, one of those words was inspire. It's still written on my daily calendar off to my right here. And it's because, Cliff, I also, like you said you love the nuts and bolts of this. You're digging in and you're being very scientific and methodological. And I as well. I mean, I'm a technocrat. That's what I love to do. I'm an introvert scientist. That's what I do. So to try to be outwardly motivational, inspirational, and grab clients by the collar and say, come on, you can fucking do this. Like, come on, like you got to get in the game with me. That's a big part of what we do. We have to be able to motivate. Any performance sport coach has that. And I feel like that's still a bit of an untapped potential in some people who want to coach. And that is a differential in really successful coaches of all types. So is that intentional on your part? Do you find yourself saying, okay, I got to go into psycho coach mode here, or is it just part of who you are?
I think that I've tried to stay very true to myself in terms of like the version of myself that I give people, right? There are parts of me that I keep just for me and my family, if that makes sense. But I've really always kind of taken the approach of I can't ask people to do things I won't do myself. And so I kind of told myself, like, if I want my clients to get lean, I've got to show them I can get very lean. If they know I'll push to that level, then, I have the right to ask them, to ask them to go to that level as well. I've always been a pretty extreme person. It's funny because I think it's interesting because I'm not the kind of guy that's usually going to yell and get in your face. But I am very blunt and straightforward to my clients. Hey, you need to do this. And there have been times where sometimes a client isn't, they don't seem all in. And sometimes I'll just say, like, I'm not sure if this sport is for you, and sometimes those words can hit hard, even if they're just said in a very calm, blunt manner. So it's very interesting. I think I've kind of found my own, I realized along the way, though, I've kind of found my own brand of motivation, if that makes sense. I'm not the type of guy that's going to yell at you and get in your face and, give you the rah rah pep talk, but I will be the one that will, I'm going to challenge you and question you. I always say that I've actually gotten the way I've come to it more is that I kind of reverse engineer the process that I kind of, we all kind of haphazardly get to a point where we've gone through our own process. And so I kind of try to reverse engineer it and guide people, if that makes sense. I want to ask them questions. I want them to ask themselves questions, and I want to ask them questions that will lead them to the correct answers, if that makes sense. Like, and so, no, it's interesting. I went to a wedding just fairly recently where I don't even know what I was talking about. I was talking with me and my fiance were there, and I was talking to her and her friend from college, and I said, we're just talking about normal stuff. I don't even know. And she goes, you're kind of an extreme guy, aren't you? And I guess I don't, sometimes I don't tend to think of myself that way. I just kind of do what feels good and what feels natural to me. But I've realized that I do tend to go all in on things. And I guess I've just kind of taken the approach of, I do it without even feeling extreme. I'm not the guy that's like, I'm not pushing myself to do things. I'm just going into them full go, and it feels natural. And so I guess I've taken the approach with my clients of, if I can do this without having to push myself to do it, I just kind of will let's walk you into these extremes. Does that make sense? I know it
Yeah.
sounds.
And well, I mean, you look at some of the greatest coaches ever, like Mike Krzyzewski and so forth. And there is, I mean, as you're describing it, there's the confidence and there's the calmness, they don't have to rant and rave. And I think just the fact that you create this sense of ownership that people respond. And when you do have that group dynamic, an entire team of clients who are not just centered around you, they obviously want to please you in a sense. They have the positive support of other, Team Wilson, members and so forth. And so it does just create that positive synergy. But at the same time, there is a definite ethic of discipline. At least I get that from the clients of yours that I know. And I think that's part of what has really helped you slice your way to the top of the industry.
There's a good point. You actually mentioned something that it just came to my mind, probably around 2013, maybe early 2014. I had this I still have this private Facebook group for all my clients where they can interact with each other. And I remember there was a period where there was a lot of complaining going on. I'm hungry, I'm tired, and it kind of became this bitch fest, we're just going to complain. I made a post. I was like, there are hard aspects to the sport, but we're here because ultimately it's a net enjoyable experience for us, or net positive, even if not necessarily enjoyable. It gives us something. And I just said, I would really like it if, we all get these great results, and people on the outside are looking at us thinking, how do they make it look so easy? I was like, I think that's something to aspire to. I was like, it doesn't mean you never complain, but maybe let's talk to our loved ones about the challenges of it. Talk to me about it. Let's not make this public complaining thing. And I said, I think it's something to strive for, to do things that seem very hard, but then do it with your head, your head held high, and welcome it. And so I really do try to I try to instill in my clients along the way that there is a lot of virtue in working hard and enjoying the hard work, instead of complaining every step of the way. And I'll be damned, they really embraced it. And one thing that has been so great, it's like this kind of, and I was so young when I started all this, but I didn't really foresee how it would play out. I said some things, and then the people that were competing, they took it to heart and they did it. And then it was almost like I didn't even need to continue to reinstill it, because then when this group did it, the group that was going to compete it the following year, they watched how those guys did it, and then they were like, that's how I do it. And it was almost like this thing that just took off and ran on its own, because every group that's competing the following year, they're watching this group that's getting on stage now do it. And they're like, okay, that's the pattern, right? That's how I do it. And I really mean it when I say this. And sometimes I think people think I'm just trying to put this humble thing out there, but it is true. As a coach, you're only as good as the talent you have. And when I say talent, it's not always genetics or building muscle or getting lean. It's the character and work ethic of the people. And I was so lucky to have a great group of people that set that standard in the 2010, 11, 12 years. And then it just became this this is the way you do it. And every group after has kind of continued that process.
Well, to flip that slightly back to you, leadership, like we've discussed in science, we kind of grow into. You don't wake up when you're 18 or 22 years old and say, hey, I'm going to be a leader. And like George Washington in his 20s in the French and Indian War, on the front lines, coming back from battle with literal musket holes through his jacket. When you lead like that, as you said, if you're going to ask people to get lean, you want to show them you can be the leanest, and your intensity and your drive is the greatest among your entire company. That you create the standard, you create the ethic that people follow. And even your interjection at that moment in your Facebook group, that was a point where you could have handled it many different ways. You were instructional, you were positive, and you just had those core components of leadership, which even though we hopefully get better at it as we get older with more experience, those remnants were there. And I think that's why you emerged as one of the top coaches you are today. But as a way to just wrap this up, because again, the whole premise of this series is to look at the trajectory of where this personal coaching industry started in the nutrition world, how it developed, why it is where it is. And you were a big part of that. So looking back at your history the last 14 years, what do you see now that you like? And what are you hopeful for the future? In 20 years, where do you want this to be? And what will your mark have been?
So what I like now is there's just so much more access to good information. I mean, it is fantastic. I mean, sometimes when I scroll through social media, I see knowledge readily available that I had to just dig for. I mean, well, trial and error for years and dig for it. And now it's on everybody's Instagram or Facebook pages, which is outstanding. And I absolutely love it. Um, my hope is that there's an increasing push towards short form content, quick hit content. And I believe that has its place. But my hope is that there will be an embracing of deeper content. It seems like the trend line has been to go shorter and shorter, quick hit information as people's attention spans are shrinking. I would like to see. I'm hopeful that there will be this want for deeper, more meaningful information. I know that because I think that's where the real magic happens. When you really get down into the nuance of everything, and that's the fun part, when there's no clear cut black and white answer. That's the fun part for me. So I'm hopeful. I think right now there's this novelty of social media, of quick hit information, and I do believe that it will come back to where there will be quick hit information for people that are just starting out, and then there will be more avenues for deeper, in-depth discussions of things. And I guess, I mean, as far as my place and things go, I mean, it is cool, right? It's cool to think you were one of the first people to kind of start putting yourself out there and do it. And I do take pride in that. But, ultimately, I'd say the things that I probably really want to be remembered for are the things more around my household with my daughter and my fiance and everything. And, ultimately, as the future goes on, I just hope I hope there's always a place for me in this industry to continue to do it as long as I choose to do it. I don't see myself being the guy that ever like fully retires. So I could see myself if I'd like to be 70 years old one day, still coach some clients, even if it's just a handful of them, I want to keep doing it.
Well, I'm a little bit of a testament to the fact that you could definitely keep evolving and find a place. Even as I had kind of left the industry and done some other things and come back, it's one of the great benefits, I think, of not just our industry, but the entire economy and evolving social structures that we have, especially around social media, in that you create your own value. And as you have established that with such a great foundation, I have no doubt that as your life evolves, both socially, familially, occupationally, you'll always find a place. Because like I said, that intensity is infectious, and especially when it's strength under control and with some resolve, like you exhibit, and the fact that you just still have that hunger to keep improving, to helping people. And so as the weirdness was in our relationship, that wasn't a relationship, but we've known each other for so long, known of each other for so long, it has just been a pleasure. I knew coming into this interview, Cliff, that I would be like, okay, I'm gonna regret not having known Cliff for the last 10 or 15 years, and now I do. But what a great opportunity to get to know you now.
No, I really appreciate having me on. And like I said, it was it was definitely a weird start for, because we never really spoke before. I think I said a few words to you as I was getting ready to go on stage in 2008. But it's good to actually do this finally.
Awesome. Well, and my sincere thanks for you bringing such rigor, intensity, and that scientific thirst into our industry, because you are one of the good guys who are moving it forward in a place that I could only be thrilled with. So thank you, Cliff Wilson.
I appreciate it. Thank you.